The fluorescent lights in the courtroom felt too bright. Simone Clark gripped the wooden railing in front of her, trying to focus on the judge's face instead of the woman sitting 3 rows behind her husband's attorney. Candace Richardson sat there with her legs crossed, designer heels tapping against the floor, wearing a smile that made Simone's stomach turn. "Mrs. Clark, do you need a moment?" Judge Morrison asked, peering over his glasses at her. Simone shook her head, though her vision had started to blur at the edges. She'd been standing for 20 minutes while Candace testified, and every word out of that woman's mouth had been a knife twisting deeper into an already bleeding wound. "As I was saying," Candace continued, her voice sweet as poisoned honey, "Simone knew about our relationship from the beginning. She and Brandon had what they called an understanding. She was focused on her charity work and didn't mind that Brandon and I had grown close." The lie was so bold, so perfectly delivered, that several people in the courtroom nodded along. Simone felt her knees weaken. In fact, Candace reached into her designer purse, pulling out printed text messages. "Here are messages where Simone herself encouraged Brandon to spend time with me. She said, and I quote, 'You and Candace should take that trip to Miami. I trust you both completely.'" Simone's attorney, Patricia Holmes, stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. We've seen no evidence of these messages in discovery. They're from Simone's old phone," Candace said smoothly. "The one she got rid of 6 months ago. I saved screenshots because I wanted to protect myself in case she ever tried to claim otherwise." The courtroom started spinning. Simone knew those messages were fake. She'd never owned the phone number displayed on those screenshots. But Candace delivered the lie with such confidence, such perfect detail, that Simone could see doubt creeping across even the judge's face. "Furthermore," Candace continued, standing now, her voice gaining strength, "Simone knew about the business expenses she's now calling embezzlement. She approved every transfer. She signed off on every account movement. This is simply a case of a bitter woman trying to destroy her husband's reputation because their open marriage didn't work out the way she wanted." "That's not true," Simone whispered, but her voice came out too quiet. The room tilted sideways. "Mrs. Clark?" The judge's voice sounded far away. "She's lying," Simone tried to say louder, but her tongue felt thick. Those messages aren't." Brandon sat at his attorney's table, not even looking at her. He'd perfected that expression over the past 6 months, the one that said he was the victim here, the misunderstood husband whose wife had turned vindictive. Even now, he managed to look sympathetic, wounded, while his mistress sat there destroying Simone's credibility with manufactured evidence. "Your Honor," Candace said, her voice dripping with false concern, "I understand this is difficult for Simone. Mental health struggles can make people remember things differently than they actually happened. I hope she gets the help she needs." That was the moment Simone's blood pressure spiked beyond what her body could handle. The suggestion that she was mentally unstable, the implication that she'd imagined her own life, the way Candace stood there in a suit that probably cost more than Simone's car payment, smiling like she'd already won. The courtroom floor rushed up to meet her. Simone heard Patricia shout her name. Heard the judge calling for someone to call paramedics. Felt hands catching her before her head hit the ground. But the last thing she saw before everything went black was Candace's face, that smile growing wider, more satisfied, as if Simone's collapse was just more proof of her instability. When Simone's eyes fluttered open, she was lying on the courtroom floor with Patricia kneeling beside her and a bailiff checking her pulse. The overhead lights seemed even brighter than before, each one a small sun burning into her skull. "Don't move," Patricia said quietly. "Ambulance is on the way." I can't let her win," Simone managed to say. Patricia's expression was grim but determined. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only Simone could hear. "She hasn't won. Trust me. When court resumes, we're going to destroy every lie she just told." Through the fog of her fading consciousness, Simone tried to understand what Patricia meant. But exhaustion and shock were pulling her back under. The last sound she heard before the paramedics arrived was Candace's voice, still sweet, still concerned, telling someone that she hoped Simone would be okay, that this whole situation had clearly taken such a toll on her mental state. The lie was so perfect, so convincing, that Simone almost believed she was losing her mind. Almost. But somewhere in the back of her consciousness, beneath the shock and the humiliation and the betrayal, a small flame of anger still burned. Candace didn't know what Simone knew. Brandon didn't know what Simone had prepared. They thought she was weak, broken, easy to destroy with a few forged screenshots and some courtroom tears. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The text message notification lit up Brandon's phone at 2:47 a.m. Simone knew the exact time because she'd been awake for hours, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. She'd been married to Brandon Clark for 8 years, and in all that time he'd never been secretive about his phone. Until 3 months ago. Now he kept it face down constantly. Changed his passwords. Took calls in other rooms. When she asked about it, he'd laugh and say she was being paranoid, that the stress of running their consulting business was making her imagine problems that didn't exist. But Simone wasn't imagining the distance between them. Wasn't imagining how he came home later and later, how he stopped asking about her day, how he'd started scheduling weekend business trips that never used to exist. The phone buzzed again. Brandon was asleep beside her, snoring softly, one arm thrown over his face. Simone stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of incoming messages. 3, 4, 5 in a row. Who sent 5 text messages at 3 in the morning? She waited another 10 minutes, but the question burned in her mind. Finally, moving as quietly as she could, Simone slipped out of bed and walked into the bathroom, closing the door softly behind her. She sat on the edge of the tub, her heart pounding, and told herself she was being ridiculous. She was invading his privacy. She should trust her husband. But the feeling in her gut wouldn't go away. The next morning, Brandon left for an early meeting. Simone watched from the window as his car pulled out of the driveway, and then she did something she'd never done before. She went through his things. It took 20 minutes to find the second phone. It was in his car, tucked into the glove compartment under the registration papers. A basic smartphone with no case, no identification, nothing that would connect it to Brandon except that it was right there, hidden in his vehicle. Simone's hands shook as she turned it on. No password. The arrogance of that made her anger spike. He'd hidden the phone but hadn't bothered to protect it because he never thought she'd look. The messages were all there. Hundreds of them. 2 years' worth of conversations between Brandon and someone saved in his contacts as CR. Simone knew exactly who CR was. Candace Richardson. Brandon's business partner. The woman Simone had welcomed into their home for dinner parties. The woman she'd considered a friend. The messages made her physically sick. Can't wait to have you all to myself tonight. Told us I'm working late on the Morrison account. She has no idea. Sometimes I almost feel bad, but then I remember how boring she's become. When we finally make this official, first thing I'm doing is getting rid of that awful artwork she picked for the office. Simone read through 2 years of betrayal. 2 years of them laughing at her. 2 years of Brandon lying to her face while building a life with someone else. The messages got worse the further back she scrolled. They'd started as flirtation, become an affair, and then evolved into something more calculated. The business is worth more than I thought. If we play this right, we can restructure everything before filing. She trusts me completely. She'll never know about the offshore accounts until it's too late. Once the divorce goes through, we split everything. She'll be left with nothing but debt. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to steal her life. Simone sat in Brandon's car in their driveway, reading message after message that detailed how her husband and his mistress planned to rob her blind. They'd been moving money for months. Setting up accounts in other countries. Creating paper trails that would make Simone responsible for business debts while they walked away with the assets. Her first instinct was to storm inside, to call Brandon and scream at him, to drive to Candace's house and confront her. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the calculated cruelty in their messages. Maybe it was the way they called her stupid, gullible, too trusting. Or maybe it was the voice in her head that sounded like her grandmother, who'd raised Simone after her parents died. Her grandmother who'd always said that anger was fine, but revenge required a cool head and a perfect plan. Instead of confronting them, Simone took photographs. Every message. Every detail about accounts and transfers and plans. She documented everything on her own phone, backing it up to 3 different cloud accounts. Then she put Brandon's phone back exactly where she'd found it. When Brandon came home that evening, Simone was cooking dinner like everything was normal. She asked about his day, laughed at his jokes, kissed him goodnight. And while he slept beside her, she lay awake making plans. If they wanted to play games with her life, she'd show them how the game was really played. But she'd need help. The next morning, after Brandon left for his early meeting, that Simone now knew was probably breakfast with Candace, she started making calls. She needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone who specialized in cases like this. Someone who could help her burn their whole plan to the ground. Patricia Holmes' office was nothing like Simone expected. The attorney worked out of a modest building in downtown, but her reputation was anything but modest. 3 separate people had recommended her when Simone had quietly asked around. Patricia specialized in high-asset divorces where one spouse was hiding money, and she had a reputation for being ruthless when her clients were being cheated. "Tell me everything," Patricia said after Simone sat down. "And I mean everything. Don't leave anything out because you think it makes you look bad or because you're embarrassed. I need the whole truth." So Simone told her. About finding the phone. About the messages. About 2 years of lies and the plan to steal from their business. She showed Patricia all the photographs she'd taken, watching the attorney's expression grow darker with each image. "They're idiots," Patricia said finally, looking up from her tablet where she'd been reviewing the evidence. "Brilliant in their cruelty but idiots in their execution. They documented everything. That's going to destroy them. Can we use these messages in court?" Simone asked. "I took them without Brandon knowing. The phone was in a shared vehicle and you're married. You had legal access to that car." Patricia made notes on her legal pad. "But here's what concerns me. They've been planning this for 2 years. That means they've had time to move assets, create false documentation, build a case against you." Simone's stomach dropped. "What do you mean build a case against me? Think about it. They know they're stealing. They know what they're doing is illegal. So they've probably been creating evidence that makes it look like you approved all the transfers, that you knew about the accounts, that you were complicit in any questionable business dealings." Patricia tapped her pen against the desk. "That way, if you ever discovered the truth and tried to fight back, they could paint you as either a willing participant or someone who's lying for revenge. So what do? We gather more evidence. Real, solid, undeniable evidence. And we don't let them know we're coming until we have enough to bury them." Patricia leaned forward. "I'm going to connect you with a forensic accountant named Richard Chin. He's going to go through every business record, every account statement, every transaction. We're going to build a timeline of exactly how they stole from you. How long will that take? A few months if we're thorough. I know that sounds like forever, but trust me. If we move too fast, if we give them any warning, they'll destroy evidence and create more false documents. We need to be smarter than they are." Patricia's expression softened slightly. "I know this is hard. I know going home every night and pretending everything is fine while your husband is planning to ruin you is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. But it's necessary." Simone thought about it. Thought about what her grandmother would say. "When do we start?" Over the next week, Simone met with Richard Chin, the forensic accountant Patricia recommended. He was a quiet man in his 50s who'd spent 20 years tracking hidden money for divorce cases. He took copies of every business document Simone could access and got to work. "This is going to take time," he warned her. "But I'll find everything. Every account, every transfer, every penny they tried to hide." Meanwhile, Simone went home each night and played the role of loving wife. She asked Brandon about his day. Smiled when he told her about working late with Candace. Acted interested when he mentioned the new accounts they were pursuing. It was torture. But it was also clarifying. Now that Simone knew the truth, she saw the manipulation everywhere. The way Brandon would mention how tired she looked, suggesting maybe she was working too hard. The way he'd bring up their retirement accounts and joke about her being bad with money. The way he'd casually mention that Candace had such a good head for business, unlike some people. He was building a narrative, making everyone around them think Simone was incompetent, stressed, possibly unstable. That way, when everything fell apart, people would believe his story over hers. But two could play that game. Simone started documenting everything too. She kept a journal of every lie Brandon told, every time he claimed to be somewhere he wasn't. She saved emails from clients praising her work, proving her competence. She made sure people saw her at business meetings, saw her contributions, saw that she was sharp and capable. And she installed a small camera in their home office, hidden in a bookshelf, pointing directly at Brandon's desk. If he and Candace were going to have planning sessions in her house, she was going to record every word. The camera was Patricia's idea. If you catch them discussing their plans on video in your home, that's gold. That's evidence even the best lawyer can't explain away. It took 3 weeks for Brandon to bring Candace home to work on what he called the Morrison account. Simone made sure to be out that afternoon, supposedly having lunch with a friend but really sitting in her car 2 blocks away, watching the camera feed on her phone. What she heard made her blood run cold, but it also made her more determined than ever. They were going to destroy her. But she was going to destroy them first. Richard Chin called Simone exactly 47 days after she'd hired him. She was sitting in her car outside a coffee shop, taking a break from a client meeting when her phone rang. "I found it all," he said without preamble. "And it's worse than you thought." Simone's grip tightened on her phone. "How much?" $400,000. That's what they've moved out of the business accounts over the past 18 months. The transfers were small enough that they wouldn't trigger automatic alerts, but consistent enough that it adds up to real money. $400,000. Simone felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. That was money from their business, money she'd worked for, money that was supposed to be their future. Where did it go, she managed to ask. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They're listed under an LLC that Candace Richardson set up without your knowledge. On paper, the LLC looks like a legitimate vendor. That your company was paying for consulting services. But there were no actual services. Just money flowing out. Can we prove it? I've got bank statements, transfer records, and communication between Brandon and Candace discussing the transfers. They were sloppy about covering their tracks because they didn't think anyone would look. Richard paused. There's more. They've been setting up the business to fail. They've been declining profitable contracts, taking on clients who are likely to default on payments, and creating debt deliberately. The plan was to file bankruptcy on the business, stick you with the creditors, while they walk away with the money they've already moved. Simone sat in her car, staring at nothing, trying to process what she was hearing. They hadn't just stolen from her. They'd tried to destroy her entire financial future. If their plan had worked, she would have been left bankrupt and responsible for debts while they started fresh with her money. What do I do now? She asked. You take all this information to your attorney. And you file charges. This isn't just divorce material anymore. This is criminal embezzlement. This is fraud. Candace Richardson could go to prison for this. That evening, Simone met with Patricia and handed over everything Richard had found. The attorney went through the documents, her expression growing harder with each page. They're going to prison, Patricia said flatly. Or at least Candace is. Brandon might cut a deal if he's smart, but based on these messages, he's just as culpable. When do we file? Soon. But I want to make sure we have everything. Every piece of evidence, every recording, every document. Because once we file, this becomes a war. And I want to make sure we have enough ammunition to win. Over the next 2 months, Simone continued gathering evidence. The hidden camera in her home office captured 3 more sessions where Brandon and Candace discussed their plans. In one particularly damaging conversation, they laughed about how Simone had no idea what was coming. She's so trusting, Candace had said, her voice dripping with contempt. She actually believes you when you say you're working late. It's almost sad how easy this has been. She's always been naive, Brandon replied. That's what made her easy to manipulate from the start. Tell her what she wants to hear and she believes everything. Listening to that conversation, Simone had to grip the steering wheel of her car to keep from shaking with rage. But she didn't confront them. She saved the recording and sent it to Patricia. Perfect, her attorney had said. This shows premeditation. This shows deliberate deception. This is exactly what we need. Simone also spent those months securing her own financial future. She opened new bank accounts that Brandon didn't know about. She moved her personal money out of joint accounts into her own name. She made sure all her important documents were copied and stored safely away from the house. And she started rebuilding her professional network. Brandon had been isolating her from clients and colleagues for months, always suggesting she was too busy or too stressed to take on certain projects. But Simone reached out to old contacts, reconnected with people she'd worked with before, and started laying groundwork for what she'd do after the divorce. Because there would be life after Brandon. There would be a business after this betrayal. And Simone was determined to make sure that life was better than anything she'd had before. Patricia called her on a Tuesday afternoon in March. We're ready. I've got everything compiled, everything documented, everything airtight. Are you ready to do this? Simone thought about the past 4 months. Thought about every lie she'd listened to, every smile she'd faked, every night she'd lain awake planning her escape from this nightmare. Yes, she said. I'm ready. Then here's what happens next. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing divorce papers and criminal embezzlement charges against both Brandon Clark and Candace Richardson. The divorce papers will be served to Brandon at your house. The criminal charges will be delivered by police to both of them separately. He's going to lose his mind, Simone said quietly. Good. Let him. Because he's about to learn that you're not the weak, trusting fool he thought you were. You're the woman who's about to take everything he tried to steal and then some. That night, Simone barely slept. She kept running through everything in her mind, making sure she hadn't forgotten anything. In the morning, she got up early and packed 2 suitcases with her essential belongings. Patricia had arranged for her to stay with a friend until the legal proceedings were underway. At exactly 9 a.m., while Brandon was still asleep, there was a knock at the door. Simone answered it, knowing what was coming. The process server handed her the divorce papers to give to Brandon. She walked upstairs to their bedroom and placed the papers on his nightstand where he'd see them when he woke up. Then she picked up her suitcases and walked out of the house without looking back. Her phone started ringing 30 minutes later. Brandon's name flashed on the screen again and again. She didn't answer. Instead, she texted him a single message: "Talk to your lawyer. And you might want to call Candace. She's getting some interesting visitors this morning too." The war had begun. And Simone had fired the first shot. Brandon called 47 times in the first 3 hours. Simone didn't answer any of them. She sat in her friend Monica's living room, watching her phone light up over and over, and felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. For months she'd been the one in the dark. The one being manipulated and lied to. Now Brandon was the one scrambling, trying to figure out what was happening, trying to regain control of a situation that was spiraling away from him. It felt like justice. The text messages started around noon. First from Brandon: "What is this? What are you doing? Call me right now." Then: "This is insane. You can't just leave. We need to talk about this." Then: "I don't know what Candace has to do with anything. This is between us." That last one made Simone laugh out loud. He was still trying to pretend. Still trying to gaslight her even now. She didn't respond to any of them. Patricia had been clear. No contact with Brandon except through attorneys. Anything Simone said could be used against her in court. Better to stay silent and let the evidence speak for itself. Around 3 p.m. Patricia called. "Both sets of papers have been served. Brandon has the divorce filing. Both he and Candace have been notified of the criminal embezzlement charges. The police interviewed both of them separately about the financial fraud. How did they react? Brandon tried to claim you were having a mental breakdown and making false accusations. Candace tried to say the business transactions were all legitimate and approved by you. But here's the thing, when the police showed them the bank records and asked them to explain the offshore accounts, both of them suddenly needed to talk to lawyers." Simone could picture it. Brandon's face when he realized his plan had been discovered. Candace's expression when she understood that someone had been paying attention to where the money went. "What happens now?" Simone asked. "Now we prepare for war. Brandon's going to get a lawyer, probably a good one, and they're going to try to discredit you. They'll paint you as vengeful, unstable, possibly even complicit in the financial crimes. We need to be ready for every dirty trick they can throw at us." "I'm ready. I know you are. But Simone, I need you to prepare yourself for how ugly this is going to get. Brandon is going to say terrible things about you. He's going to try to destroy your reputation to save himself. And Candace is going to do the same. They're going to lie, manipulate, and do whatever they can to make themselves look like victims." "Let them try," Simone said quietly. "I have the truth on my side." Over the next few weeks, everything Patricia predicted came true. Brandon hired an expensive attorney named Robert Green who specialized in defending people accused of financial crimes. Green immediately went on the offensive, filing motions claiming that Simone had approved all the business transactions and was now lying about them out of spite. They claimed she had access to all the accounts, that she'd signed off on every transfer, that she was trying to frame Brandon and Candace because she couldn't handle the fact that her marriage was falling apart. It was all lies, but they were convincing lies. Green was good at his job, and he knew how to spin a story that made his clients look innocent and Simone look like the villain. The worst part was watching people believe it. Some of their mutual friends started avoiding Simone. She'd hear through the grapevine that Brandon was telling everyone she'd had a breakdown, that the stress of the business had been too much for her, that she was making up stories about affairs and embezzlement because she couldn't cope with reality. Even some of their business contacts started treating her differently. She'd show up to meetings and feel people watching her, wondering if she was stable, if she was trustworthy, if she was the problem everyone was whispering about. But Simone held firm. She showed up to every meeting prepared and professional. She answered questions calmly and provided documentation for everything. She let her work speak for itself while Brandon and Candace spun their lies. And she waited for the court date. Because that's when Patricia would present all the evidence. That's when the recordings and bank statements and messages would be shown to a judge who could see through the manipulation. That's when the truth would finally matter more than the lies. 2 months after filing, Simone got the court date for the divorce hearing. It would be held in 3 months, giving both sides time to prepare their cases. Patricia assured her they had everything they needed. "The criminal charges are moving forward too," Patricia told her during one of their preparation meetings. "The prosecutor's office is very interested in the embezzlement case. They've seen the evidence and they think it's solid. Candace is looking at serious prison time if convicted. And Brandon? He'll probably try to cut a deal. Testify against Candace in exchange for reduced charges. But that means he'd have to admit to everything, which would hurt him badly in the divorce case. Patricia smiled grimly. Either way, he's trapped. He can stay loyal to Candace and face full criminal charges, or he can save himself and destroy any credibility he has in divorce court. It was a perfect trap. And Simone had built it one piece of evidence at a time. But as the court date approached, the pressure intensified. Brandon's attorney filed motion after motion, trying to delay the hearing, trying to get evidence thrown out, trying to force Simone into a settlement that would let Brandon and Candace avoid the worst consequences. Simone refused every settlement offer. She wasn't interested in making deals with people who tried to destroy her. She wanted her day in court. She wanted a judge to hear everything and make it official. She wanted the world to know what they'd done. The night before the court hearing, Simone couldn't sleep. She kept going over everything in her mind, making sure she was prepared, making sure she hadn't forgotten any detail that might matter. Monica found her at 2 a.m., sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, staring at nothing. "You're going to win," Monica said, sitting down across from her. "You have the evidence. You have the truth. You're going to walk into that courtroom and destroy them." "What if the judge doesn't believe me?" Simone asked quietly. "What if they're more convincing than I am?" Then Patricia plays the recordings. Shows the bank statements. Presents the evidence that can't be argued with. Monica reached across and squeezed Simone's hand. "You're not the naive woman they thought they could manipulate anymore. You're the woman who saw what they were doing and built a case that's going to send at least one of them to prison. Have faith in that." Simone nodded, trying to believe it. Tomorrow everything would come to a head. Tomorrow she'd face Brandon and Candace in court and finally get to tell her side of the story. Tomorrow justice would either prevail or she'd learn that the system could be manipulated just as easily as she'd been. Either way, there was no turning back now. The courtroom was smaller than Simone expected. She'd watched enough legal dramas to have a picture in her mind of what it would look like, but the reality was more mundane. Plain walls, uncomfortable wooden benches, fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly sick. Brandon sat at the defendant's table with his attorney, Robert Greene. He wore a dark suit that made him look professional and sympathetic, the kind of outfit that said, "Trustworthy businessman wrongly accused." He didn't look at Simone when she walked in. Candace sat in the gallery behind Brandon's attorney, wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Simone's entire wardrobe. She looked polished, confident, like someone who'd never done anything wrong in her life. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Morrison," the bailiff announced. Judge Morrison was a man in his early 60s with gray hair and a stern expression. He'd been on the bench for 20 years, according to Patricia's research, and had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense from either side. "Let's begin," he said, settling into his chair. "I've reviewed the preliminary filings from both parties. This is a divorce proceeding with allegations of adultery and financial malfeasance. Mr. Greene, your client wishes to contest the divorce." "Yes, Your Honor." Greene stood, his voice smooth and practiced. "My client acknowledges that the marriage has broken down, but he disputes the allegations of adultery and certainly disputes the absurd claims of embezzlement. This is a case of a bitter spouse trying to weaponize the legal system because she's unhappy with how the marriage ended." Simone felt her jaw tighten, but Patricia had warned her this was coming. Greene's whole strategy would be to make her look vindictive and unstable. "Ms. Holmes?" The judge looked at Patricia. "Your Honor, we have substantial evidence proving both the affair and the financial crimes. We're prepared to present bank records, communications, and witness testimony that will demonstrate a pattern of deception and theft spanning more than 2 years." "Then let's hear it. Mr. Greene, call your first witness." What followed was 3 hours of carefully constructed lies. Brandon took the stand first, his voice steady and sad as he painted a picture of a marriage that had fallen apart naturally. He claimed Simone had become distant and cold. That she'd been more interested in her charity work than in their relationship. That when he'd sought emotional connection with his business partner Candace, it had been innocent at first. "I made a mistake," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I let my friendship with Candace become too close. But it was never the calculated affair my wife is claiming. It was two lonely people who found comfort in each other during a difficult time. It was a masterful performance." He looked remorseful but not guilty. Hurt but trying to be fair. Even Simone had to admit he was convincing if you didn't know the truth. Then Greene called Candace to the stand. "Ms. Richardson, how would you characterize your relationship with the defendant's wife, Simone Clark?" "We were friends," Candace said, her voice soft and sad. Or at least I thought we were. I cared about Simone. I invited her to business events. We had lunch together regularly. I thought she trusted me. And did you have an affair with Mr. Clark? No, Candace said firmly. Brandon and I became close as business partners, yes. We spent a lot of time together working on accounts. But it was always professional until after Simone asked for the separation. Simone's mouth fell open. That was a complete lie. There had been no separation. She'd never asked for anything until she'd filed the divorce papers. And the financial allegations? Green continued. The claims that you embezzled money from the business? That's completely false, Candace said, and this was where her performance truly began. She pulled out the printed text messages, the ones she'd claimed were from Simone's old phone. Every transaction I made was approved by Simone. In fact, she encouraged me to move money into more profitable investment accounts. She said she trusted my business judgment more than her own. Do you have proof of this? Candace handed the papers to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. These are messages from Simone where she specifically approved the account transfers. You can see the phone number matches records of her old phone, before she got a new number 6 months ago. Patricia stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. We've seen no evidence of these messages in discovery. They weren't provided during the disclosure period. Your Honor, Green responded smoothly, these messages were saved by Ms. Richardson for her own records. She didn't realize they'd be relevant until Mrs. Clark made these allegations. The judge looked at the papers, his expression unreadable. I'll allow them into evidence, but Ms. Holmes, you'll have an opportunity to challenge their authenticity during your cross-examination. That's when Candace delivered her knockout blow. She described how Simone had supposedly confided in her about wanting an open marriage. How Simone had encouraged Brandon to spend time with Candace because Simone was too busy with other things. How Simone had approved every business decision and had even suggested some of the offshore accounts. Furthermore, Candace said, her voice gaining confidence, Simone knew about my relationship with Brandon. She told me she didn't mind. She said, and I quote, "You and Brandon should take that trip to Miami. I trust you both completely." Simone felt the courtroom spinning. The lies were so detailed, so perfectly constructed, that she could see doubt creeping into even the judge's expression. How could someone lie so convincingly? How could Candace sit there and fabricate an entire alternate reality without even flinching? Based on my years of friendship with Simone, Candace continued, I have to say I'm concerned about her mental state. This vendetta against Brandon and me seems to come from nowhere. She's always been somewhat fragile, easily stressed. I think the pressure of the business became too much for her, and now she's creating these elaborate stories to explain why the marriage failed. That's when Simone's blood pressure spiked. The suggestion that she was mentally unstable, the implication that she'd imagined everything, the way Candace sat there with such perfect composure while destroying Simone's credibility. Simone gripped the railing in front of her, trying to stay calm. Patricia had warned her this would happen. Had told her to stay composed no matter what they said. But hearing yourself called crazy, hearing someone suggest you're detached from reality, was harder to handle than Simone had anticipated. Your Honor, Candace said, looking directly at the judge with an expression of concern, I hope Simone gets the help she needs. Mental health struggles can make people remember things very differently than they actually happened. I don't blame her for being confused. The courtroom tilted. Simone tried to focus on the judge's face, but her vision was blurring at the edges. Her heart was pounding too fast. The lights were too bright. That's not true, Simone whispered, but her voice came out weak. Mrs. Clark? The judge's voice sounded far away. She's lying, Simone tried to say louder, but the words wouldn't come out right. Everything was spinning now. She could hear Patricia saying her name, could hear people moving, but she couldn't focus on any of it. The last thing she saw before she collapsed was Candace's face, wearing that same satisfied smile, as if Simone's breakdown was exactly what she'd been hoping for. When Simone woke up in the small medical room adjacent to the courtroom, Patricia was sitting beside her bed and a paramedic was checking her vital signs. Blood pressure was dangerously high, the paramedic explained. You need to stay calm. No more stress for today. I have to get back in there, Simone said, trying to sit up. I have to tell the judge she's lying. You will, Patricia said firmly. But first you need to stabilize. The judge has called a 1-hour recess. When we go back in, it's our turn to present evidence. Simone lay back against the pillow, her mind racing. She was so convincing. Those fake text messages, the way she said I approved everything. What if the judge believes her? He won't. Not after what we're about to show him. Patricia pulled out her tablet, opening a video file. Remember the recordings from your home office? The ones where Brandon and Candace discussed their plans. Yes. We're going to play them. All of them. Every conversation where they laughed about fooling you. Every discussion about moving money. Every moment where they revealed exactly who they are and what they were doing. Simone felt her heart rate start to slow. You think it will be enough? It's not just enough. It's devastating. Because Candace just spent an hour on the stand claiming she never had an affair, that everything was above board, that you approved all the transactions. But we have her voice on tape saying the exact opposite. Patricia smiled grimly. She walked right into our trap. 30 minutes later, Simone walked back into the courtroom. Candace was still sitting in the gallery, still looking confident. Brandon wouldn't meet Simone's eyes. The judge was reviewing something on his desk. Mrs. Clark, are you well enough to continue? Judge Morrison asked when everyone was seated. Yes, Your Honor. Then let's proceed. Ms. Holmes, call your first witness. Patricia stood. Your Honor, before we call witnesses, we'd like to present video evidence that directly contradicts the testimony we've heard this morning. Green was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. We've seen no video evidence in discovery. This evidence was obtained legally from a camera installed in Mrs. Clark's home office, Patricia explained. It was disclosed in our evidence list as video recordings from marital residence. The defense chose not to request copies during discovery. The judge looked at Green. Is that true? Green shifted uncomfortably. We assumed any such recordings would be inadmissible. Well, they're not. Unless you can give me a legal reason to exclude them? The judge raised an eyebrow. Green sat down, his jaw tight. No, Your Honor. Then proceed, Ms. Holmes. Patricia connected her tablet to the courtroom's video system. What you're about to see are 3 separate conversations between Brandon Clark and Candace Richardson, recorded in Mrs. Clark's home office over a period of 2 months. In these conversations, they discussed their affair, their plans to embezzle money from the business, and their intention to leave Mrs. Clark bankrupt and responsible for business debts. She pressed play. The first recording showed Brandon and Candace sitting at the desk in Simone's home office. The date stamp in the corner showed it was from 4 months ago. Brandon's voice came through clearly. The offshore accounts are set up. I moved another $50,000 yesterday. Did she notice? Candace's voice. She never notices. She just signs whatever I put in front of her. Brandon laughed. It's almost too easy. We're up to $400,000 now. Once we hit $500,000, we file bankruptcy on the business and disappear. In the courtroom, Candace's face had gone pale. Brandon was staring at the screen in horror. The video continued. What if she figures it out? Candace asked. She won't. And if she does, we've got enough fake documentation to make it look like she approved everything. We'll say she was complicit, that she helped move the money. Who's a judge going to believe? A respected businessman and his partner, or a woman having a mental breakdown? Patricia paused the video. Your Honor, Ms. Richardson spent this morning claiming she never had an affair with Mr. Clark and that all business transactions were legitimate and approved by my client. This recording proves otherwise. She played the second recording. This one was even more damaging. Brandon and Candace were clearly intimate in the video, kissing and touching each other while discussing their plans. I can't wait to be done with this charade, Candace said. Pretending to be friends with her makes me sick. Just a few more months, Brandon replied. Then we take the money and start over. She'll be so buried in debt and legal problems she won't have time to come after us. And if she does? We'll destroy her credibility. Make everyone think she's unstable. It's not hard. She's already halfway to a breakdown from stress. The courtroom was completely silent except for the voices on the recording. Simone watched the judge's face, watched his expression harden with each word. Patricia played the third recording. This one was the most recent, from just 2 weeks before Simone filed for divorce. I almost feel bad sometimes, Candace said on the recording. Don't, Brandon replied. She's too trusting, too naive. This is natural selection. The smart people win, the stupid people lose. They both laughed. Patricia stopped the recording and turned to face Candace. Ms. Richardson, you testified under oath that you never had an affair with Brandon Clark. You said all business transactions were legitimate. You suggested my client was mentally unstable and imagining things. Would you like to revise your testimony? Candace's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her perfect composure had shattered completely. She looked at Brandon, who looked at his attorney, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere but in that courtroom. Your Honor, Patricia continued, we also have bank records showing the $400,000 in stolen funds, corporate documents proving the offshore accounts were set up without Mrs. Clark's knowledge, and communications between the defendants discussing their embezzlement scheme. Every claim they made this morning was a lie. Judge Morrison's expression was thunderous. Mr. Clark, Ms. Richardson, I'm going to give you both one opportunity to explain these recordings. And I suggest you choose your words very carefully. Brandon stood slowly. Your Honor, we made mistakes. The affair happened. But the business transactions were legitimate. Those recordings are taken out of context. Out of context? The judge's voice could have cut steel. I just watched video of you discussing stealing $500,000 from your wife and framing her for it. What possible context makes that legitimate? I misspoke on those recordings. I was venting, exaggerating. The money movements were real business expenses that... Enough. Judge Morrison held up a hand. Ms. Richardson, do you have anything to add? Candace stood, her hands shaking. The confident woman from an hour ago had completely disappeared. I need to speak with my attorney. I'm sure you do. Because based on what I've just seen, you've committed perjury in my courtroom, and I'm going to be referring this matter to the prosecutor's office. He turned to the bailiff. Make a note that I'm recommending perjury charges against Candace Richardson for her testimony this morning. Simone felt tears running down her face, but they were tears of relief. Finally, someone in authority had heard the truth. Had seen through the lies. Had recognized the manipulation for what it was. This court stands in recess for 1 hour, Judge Morrison announced. When we return, I expect to hear revised testimony from the defendants. And I strongly suggest both of you consult with your attorneys about the serious legal jeopardy you're now facing. He stood and left the courtroom. The moment he was gone, Candace collapsed back into her seat, her face in her hands. Brandon looked at Simone for the first time all day, and the expression on his face was pure panic. Patricia squeezed Simone's shoulder. We won. Everything else is just formality now. And for the first time in 6 months, Simone allowed herself to believe it was true. When court resumed an hour later, the energy in the room had completely changed. Brandon and Candace sat on opposite sides of the courtroom now, their united front having crumbled the moment the recordings played. Green looked like he'd aged 10 years during the recess. Judge Morrison took his seat and surveyed the room with an expression that promised no mercy. We're back on the record. Mr. Green, has your client revised his testimony? Green stood slowly. Your Honor, after consulting with my client, we acknowledge that certain aspects of this morning's testimony were inaccurate. Mr. Clark admits to having an affair with Ms. Richardson. However, he maintains that. Stop. The judge held up a hand. I don't want to hear carefully worded admissions designed to minimize criminal liability. I watched those recordings, Mr. Green. I heard your client discuss stealing from his wife, framing her for business crimes, and deliberately trying to destroy her financially and emotionally. So let's be very clear about what we're dealing with here. He turned to Brandon directly. Mr. Clark, you've committed fraud, embezzlement, and perjury in my courtroom. The divorce you were contesting is hereby granted. Furthermore, I'm awarding Mrs. Clark full ownership of the business you attempted to destroy, plus compensation for all stolen funds with interest, plus punitive damages for emotional distress. Your Honor, we haven't even discussed asset division yet, Green protested weakly. There's nothing to discuss. Your client stole $400,000 from a business he co-owned with his wife. That money will be returned in full with interest. Additionally, Mr. Clark will pay spousal support of $5,000 per month for 5 years. The family home will go to Mrs. Clark. The retirement accounts will be split with a 70-30 division in Mrs. Clark's favor due to your client's financial misconduct. Simone couldn't believe what she was hearing. It was more than she'd hoped for. More than seemed possible. The judge wasn't finished. Ms. Richardson, your testimony this morning was perjurious. You claimed under oath that you never had an affair with Mr. Clark, that all business transactions were legitimate, and that Mrs. Clark approved your actions. The recordings prove all of that was false. Candace stood, her voice shaking. Your Honor, I was scared. I made mistakes in my testimony because I was trying to protect. You were trying to protect yourself by lying to this court. That's perjury, Ms. Richardson. I'm referring your case to the prosecutor's office with a recommendation for criminal charges. The embezzlement case against you will proceed separately, but based on the evidence presented today, I expect you'll be facing significant prison time. Patricia leaned close to Simone and whispered, "She's going to prison. The embezzlement evidence is rock solid." The judge continued reading his ruling. The business known as Clark Consulting is hereby transferred entirely to Simone Clark. Brandon Clark's partnership stake is forfeit due to his criminal conduct. All business assets, client lists, and ongoing contracts now belong solely to Mrs. Clark. Brandon's attorney tried one more time. "Your Honor, that essentially leaves my client with nothing. He built that business from the ground up. He built it with his wife, then tried to destroy it while stealing from her. He's lucky I'm not holding him in contempt for the perjury he committed this morning." Judge Morrison closed his folder. "This divorce is granted effective immediately. Mr. Clark has 30 days to vacate the marital home and remove his personal belongings. All financial transfers must be completed within 90 days. He looked at both Brandon and Candace with clear disgust. "I've been on this bench for 20 years and I've seen many ugly divorces. But this case represents some of the most calculated, cruel manipulation I've encountered. You both attempted to destroy an innocent woman financially and emotionally. You lied to this court. You manufactured evidence. You showed absolutely no remorse until your own recordings proved your guilt." Standing up, he delivered his final statement. "Mr. Clark, you're a disgrace to your profession. Ms. Richardson, you're facing criminal prosecution and likely imprisonment. I hope the money you stole was worth it, because you've both destroyed your own lives in the process of trying to destroy someone else's." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. It was over. Simone sat frozen in her seat, unable to process that it was really done. Patricia was hugging her, saying something about how this was a complete victory, but Simone could barely hear her over the ringing in her ears. She looked at Brandon, who sat slumped at his table, his face buried in his hands. Then at Candace, who was crying openly now, all her polished confidence shattered. They tried to destroy her. Had spent 2 years building a case to rob her blind and leave her broken. And instead they destroyed themselves. "Come on," Patricia said gently. "Let's get out of here. We've got paperwork to file, but the hard part is over." As Simone walked out of the courtroom, she passed Candace in the hallway. Their eyes met for just a moment. Candace opened her mouth as if to say something, but Simone kept walking. There was nothing Candace could say that mattered anymore. Outside the courthouse, Patricia went over the next steps. The criminal prosecution of Candace will take a few months. The prosecutor has all our evidence, and based on what the judge said today, they're going to throw the book at her. She's looking at 3 to 5 years minimum for embezzlement. And Brandon? He'll probably try to cut a deal by testifying against Candace. But even if he does, he's still on the hook for all the financial penalties the judge ordered. Plus, his professional reputation is destroyed. No one's going to want to do business with someone who was publicly exposed as a thief and liar. Simone took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling like she could breathe properly for the first time in months. "What do I do now?" "Now?" Patricia smiled. "Now you go rebuild your life. You've got a business to run, money coming back to you, and all the time in the world to figure out who you want to be without Brandon." "Thank you," Simone said, and meant it with everything she had. "For believing me. For fighting for me. That's my job." "But Simone, you did the hard part. You gathered the evidence. You stayed strong when they were calling you crazy. You played the long game and won." Patricia squeezed her shoulder. "Most people would have crumbled under that kind of pressure. You didn't. Remember that." As Simone drove away from the courthouse, her phone started ringing. Monica's name flashed on the screen. "How did it go?" her friend asked anxiously. "We won," Simone said and started crying. "We won everything. I knew you would. Come over. We're celebrating tonight." But Simone didn't want to celebrate yet. There was something she needed to do first. She drove to the business office, the one she'd built with Brandon but that now belonged entirely to her. She walked through the empty space, looking at everything with new eyes. This was hers now. All of it. The future she'd thought was destroyed was actually just beginning. And it was going to be better than anything she'd had before. 3 months after the court ruling, Simone sat in her newly renovated office and looked at the changes she'd made. Gone were the dark colors and heavy furniture Brandon had preferred. The space was now bright and open, with modern furnishings and artwork from local African-American artists displayed on the walls. Clark Consulting had been renamed Ascend Strategic Solutions. New name, new vision, new everything. The Henderson account signed, her new business partner, Jerome Thompson, said, walking into her office with a wide smile. Jerome was someone Simone had worked with years ago, before Brandon had subtly pushed him out of their professional circle. When Simone reached out after the divorce, Jerome had been eager to join forces. "That's the third major contract this month," Simone said, hardly believing it. "We're actually doing this." "We're crushing it," Jerome corrected. "Turns out when you're not sabotaging your own company to hide embezzlement, business does pretty well." It was true. In the 3 months since Simone had taken full control, Ascend had grown faster than Clark Consulting ever had. She brought in new talent, pursued clients that Brandon had always dismissed as too small, and completely restructured their service model. The $400,000 Brandon was required to return had come through in stages, as he'd had to sell his car and other assets to meet the court deadline. Simone had reinvested every penny into the business. New equipment, better software, hiring talented people who'd been overlooked by bigger firms. But more than the business success, Simone felt different. Lighter. Like she'd been carrying a weight for years without realizing it, and now it was finally gone. Her phone buzzed with a text from Monica. "Lunch? I have news." They met at a cafe downtown. Monica was practically vibrating with excitement when Simone arrived. "Okay, you know how you've been helping me with my nonprofit's marketing strategy?" Monica said. "Well, I told the board about everything you went through and how you handled it. They want to hire you to create a workshop series." "A workshop series about what?" "About recognizing financial abuse in relationships. About protecting yourself legally. About rebuilding after betrayal." Monica grabbed Simone's hands across the table. "You could help so many women who are going through what you went through. Share what you learned about gathering evidence, working with lawyers, staying strong." Simone sat back thinking about it. "I don't know if I'm ready to be that public about what happened. Think about it this way. Brandon and Candace tried to destroy you by making you feel weak and stupid for trusting them. The best revenge is showing other women how to be strong and smart. How to protect themselves before they end up in your situation." It was an interesting idea. And the more Simone thought about it, the more it appealed to her. She'd learned so much about financial law, evidence gathering, and personal strength over the past year. Why not use that knowledge to help others? "Let me think about it," she told Monica. "But I'm interested." That evening, Simone got a call from Patricia with news about the criminal case. "Candace Richardson pled guilty to embezzlement and fraud," Patricia announced. "She's getting 4 years in prison with possible parole after 3. She also has to pay full restitution, which means you're getting another $100,000 that she personally stole." 4 years, Simone repeated, trying to process it. The prosecutor wanted to go to trial, but Candace's attorney convinced her that the evidence was too strong. Between the recordings and the forensic accounting, she had no chance of winning. Taking the plea deal was her only option to avoid a longer sentence. Did she say anything? Any apology or explanation? Nothing. She accepted the plea, signed the paperwork, and that was it. Patricia paused. Sometimes people like that never really acknowledge what they did. They just move on to the next chapter and try to forget. But Simone knew Candace wouldn't be able to forget. 4 years in prison was a long time to think about how greed and betrayal had destroyed her life. As for Brandon, he'd fallen even further. The professional networking group he'd been part of for years had quietly asked him to leave. Several of his former clients had cut ties. He'd been forced to take a job at a mid-level consulting firm making a fraction of what he used to earn. Simone knew this because mutual acquaintances still talked. They'd tell her about seeing Brandon at business events, looking diminished and bitter, complaining about how his ex-wife had ruined his life. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on anyone. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Simone made a decision. She was going to start a foundation. The Clark Foundation for Financial Empowerment would provide free legal consultations, financial advice, and support services for women dealing with financial abuse in relationships. "This is amazing," Patricia said when Simone told her the plan. "But why use the Clark name? You could call it anything." "Because Brandon spent years making people think the Clark name meant him. I want to reclaim it. I want the Clark name to stand for helping people instead of manipulating them." She poured her energy into building the foundation. Recruited volunteer attorneys, partnered with domestic violence organizations, created workshops and resources. Within 3 months, they'd helped 20 women navigate divorces where financial abuse was a factor. And every time Simone met with someone who'd been lied to, manipulated, or had their money stolen by someone they trusted, she shared her own story. Not to make herself seem heroic, but to show them that survival was possible. That justice was possible. That building something better on the other side was possible. The foundation grew. Ascend Solutions grew. Simone's reputation as a business strategist who understood both success and rebuilding after failure grew. A year after the divorce, a publisher contacted her. They'd heard about her foundation and wanted to know if she'd be interested in writing a book about financial abuse and recovery. Simone said yes. She spent 6 months writing Stolen Trust, Recognizing and Recovering from Financial Betrayal. The book combined her personal story with practical advice, legal information, and resources for anyone dealing with similar situations. It was therapeutic to write, to put all those feelings and experiences into words, to turn her pain into something that might help someone else avoid the same fate. Meanwhile, Brandon's life had continued its downward spiral. He'd been forced to declare bankruptcy when he couldn't keep up with the alimony payments and restitution orders. His professional license in consulting had been suspended due to the fraud conviction he'd eventually pled to. Last Simone had heard, he was working in sales at an electronics store. Candace was still in prison with another year left on her sentence. Simone didn't think about her often, but when she did, she felt neither satisfaction nor pity. Just a sense that justice had been served and everyone had gotten what they earned. 3 years after the divorce, Simone went on a date. His name was Marcus Johnson, and he owned a construction company. They'd met at a Chamber of Commerce event, and he'd asked her to dinner with no agenda except getting to know her better. "I looked you up online before I called," Marcus admitted over appetizers. "I read about what happened with your ex-husband and his business partner. That must have been terrible." Simone appreciated his honesty. "It was. But it also taught me a lot about myself. About what I'm capable of when I have to be strong. Well, for what it's worth, I think anyone who would betray you like that is an idiot. You're clearly amazing at what you do." It was a nice evening. Marcus was kind, straightforward, and seemed genuinely interested in her as a person rather than as a business contact or potential conquest. They went on a second date, then a third. Simone took things slowly, careful not to rush into anything, but enjoying the possibility of connection with someone honest. She wasn't desperate to be in a relationship. Wasn't looking for someone to complete her or fix her loneliness. She'd built a full life on her own, with her business, her foundation, her friends, and her purpose. If something developed with Marcus or someone else, that would be wonderful. If not, she was still whole. That was the biggest change. Before Brandon, Simone had defined herself through her marriage, through being someone's wife. During the betrayal, she defined herself through the fight, through being a survivor. But now, she defined herself through her accomplishments, her values, and the positive impact she was making in the world. 4 years after the divorce, Ascend Solutions had offices in 5 cities and employed 40 people. The Clark Foundation had helped over 1,000 women. Simone's book was in its 4th printing and being used as a textbook in some college courses about financial law and domestic abuse. Simone stood in her corner office on the 20th floor of a downtown building, looking out at the city skyline. She thought about the woman she'd been 4 years ago, collapsing in that courtroom while her husband's mistress smiled. That woman had felt broken, humiliated, like she'd never be whole again. But she'd been wrong. She hadn't been broken. Just bent. And she'd straightened herself back up stronger than before. Her phone rang. It was Marcus, now her boyfriend of 6 months. "Dinner tonight?" he asked. "There's a new restaurant I want to try." "Sounds perfect," Simone said, smiling. After they hung up, she took one more look at the city. Somewhere out there, Brandon was probably still bitter about how things had turned out. Candace was probably serving the last year of her prison sentence, thinking about the career and life she'd thrown away for stolen money. But Simone wasn't wasting her time thinking about them. She had a business to run, a foundation to grow, and a life to enjoy. A life she'd built from scratch after everything had been torn down. A life that was entirely her own, built on her own terms, free from manipulation and lies. The best revenge, she'd learned, wasn't destroying the people who'd hurt you. It was building something so beautiful, so successful, so meaningful that their betrayal became just a small chapter in a much larger story. A chapter about resilience, transformation, and the incredible things that become possible when you refuse to let anyone define your worth except yourself. Simone picked up her bag and headed out. She had a dinner to attend, a foundation board meeting tomorrow, and a speech at a women's college next week. Her calendar was full of opportunities, relationships, and purpose. And she wouldn't have it any other way.